You're listening to the Climate Dispatch podcast, presented by Sierra Club Angeles Chapter and Stranded Astronaut Productions. Available everywhere you listen to podcasts, we cover the stories of the climate crisis, from celebrating the wins to breaking down our fears, all while sharing collective hopes for the future. I'm your host, Taya Jeanette, and this week we're talking about the human impacts of oil production, the hidden wells in Los Angeles, and the David versus Goliath fight against big oil. When you first picture the city of Los Angeles, you might think of the bright blue skies, the golden sunset over Santa Monica Beach, and the ever-presence of a glamorous Hollywood movie industry. What you might not imagine are oil pump jacks in city parks or lurking underneath the ground near Dodger Stadium. But before the studios ran this town, the oil industry did. Despite a reputation for being a green state, California currently ranks number 7 in the country for oil and gas production, with over 100,000 wells in the state. In LA County alone, there are at least 8,000 active and idle oil wells, many of which are located near schools, playgrounds, and parks. Los Angeles County is particularly unique for the sheer amount of oil wells located so close to so many people. 1/3 of residents live within 1 mile of oil operations.
I grew up 30 feet across the street from an active oil and gas well that severely impacted my health. From nosebleeds to asthma to cancer, I've unfortunately had it all.
That's Nalleli Cobo, a climate activist who successfully shut down oil drilling in her neighborhood, whose activism began at the humble age of 9. She's joined by Nicole Levin, an organizer with the Sierra Club Angeles chapter, to help us break down the campaigns taking on the oil industry and better understand how we can win against big oil. Not only is oil production hazardous for planetary health and a leading cause of the climate crisis by emitting greenhouse gases, it's also toxic to human health. Living or working near a well can cause cardiovascular and respiratory issues, nosebleeds, headaches, and even cancer. Proximity to an oil well is what brought Nalleli into this work.
I remember the very first night I learned we were living next to an oil well. I was out late at night with my older sister, and we were walking home, and it smelled really bad, like artificial guava. Immediately, I had a headache, I was nauseous. We went inside of the house, and I'm very blessed to have grown up in a 5-generation family, and the house was empty, the house was never empty. But my mom quickly ran out of a room, and she ushered me and my sister inside, and that's when we saw the entire family crammed in one little room. And my mom said that the smell was coming from the oil well across the street, and that we all had to sleep in the same room that night because we only owned one air purifier, but that we didn't have to worry because she would do everything in her power to keep us safe. That really stuck with me, and the next day we crossed the street walking to school, and we read every single sign on that oil well wall. And the one that I've never forgotten is the sign that reads, "Dangerous chemicals known to the state of California to cause cancer, birth defects, and reproductive harm."
From that point on, Nalleli's life was changed forever. She found herself in an unexpected role as an activist, while struggling herself from the direct impacts of this oil site on her own health.
My health changed entirely overnight. I was always a healthy little girl, and all of a sudden I was starting to see cardiologists and gastroenterologists and all these other fancy ologists that I didn't even know existed. And it became my reality that I couldn't go outside to play anymore because that would trigger an asthma attack. I developed heart palpitations so severe, and I would wear a heart monitor for several weeks. I had nosebleeds so intense, I could no longer sleep in my own bed. I would sleep in a chair to prevent choking on my own blood at night. Headaches, stomach pains, body spasms so severe where I couldn't move. My mom would carry me from one place to the other. The list goes on, and unfortunately it wasn't just me, it was my family. My mom developed asthma at the age of 40, my grandmother at the age of 70. So many issues were happening in our household and outside, but it became a common conversation starter for our parents to stop each other in the street and ask about their children's health. So walking to and from school, you would hear our parents say, "My child's in the ER, can you help me pick up my other kids from school?" Or, "How's your child's asthma today?" And that's devastating. That shouldn't be the way our parents greet each other in the streets. And as time went on, we noticed that this was a very, very big public health issue in our community.
It's devastating, but it's also, in a very unfortunate way, something that can bring communities together as something that is impacting a lot of people. And once we start seeing how our own health can be impacted, or the health of our loved ones or our children or our family, it can become a little bit of a personal vendetta to want to fight the group or company that is causing this kind of pain for ourselves and our community. So how did you go from being a young child impacted by this and having your family start to talk to other families in the community to becoming something of a giant voice in the fight against the Allen Co. facility that was right next to your house?
Honestly, I never thought that my activism would lead me to where I am today. I began my activism at the age of 9, and it was born out of survival. I didn't even learn the word activist until I was 11. And it was only because a reporter had asked me, how does it feel being an activist? And I was like, I don't know what that word is. I'm so sorry. It was me taking my activism day by day. It was me fighting so I could open the windows in my own home. And then I learned that it wasn't just my community being affected by oil and gas well, but Los Angeles is the largest urban oil fields in the nation. So we started advocating alongside different organizations and nonprofit groups to help phase out the city of Los Angeles and to build something, a coalition within the city. Then we realized the state of California has such a big issue, and we moved on to the state. And it was always sort of that domino effect that I've continued my advocacy.
Nalleli isn't alone in this fight against big oil. A number of coalitions, grassroots organizations, and activists have come together to bring awareness to the public health impacts of neighborhood oil drilling. While campaigning with the Sierra Club Clean Break Committee, Nicole Levin worked with local coalitions to urge for the end of oil operations within Los Angeles. After the historic vote to phase out oil drilling in LA City and LA County, Nicole's attention turned to Long Beach and Signal Hill, where big oil is attempting to extend its stay.
Scientists from Climate Brunch came up to me, and they're like, did you know that Signal Hill Petroleum is trying to drill another 46 new wells and extend their permits for their existing 500 wells for another 20 years? It's a 2.2 square mile city. There are over 500 wells, and they're right next to homes. And Signal Hill is touted as this like one of the best places to retire to, other than the fact that the air is poison and the wells are right there.
Signal Hill is a pocket-sized city of a little over 11,000 residents, known best for its oil and a 360-foot hill. It's squeezed just above Long Beach and about 30 miles below downtown Los Angeles. The city's iconic hill, once used by the Tongva to send smoke signals, now offers panoramic views of the neighboring cities. Signal Hill is filled with families and young professionals, with plenty of restaurants, coffee shops, and schools, everything you might expect for a suburb disguised within the urban landscape. But sitting in the backyards and towering over playgrounds are over 400 oil wells, with pump jacks bobbing up and down as the backdrop to this 2.2 square mile city.
As someone who doesn't live in Signal Hill, I was like, I'm anxious to just come in and start having opinions on what should and should not be done. So we started a canvassing effort, and we went door to door to residents in Signal Hill to see, did you know about this project? How do you feel about it? Did you know about the health effects of living near oil drilling? It was astounding. Not a single resident knew about the project. Once we told them about it, they couldn't believe that this was happening, that their city was allowing this to happen. And many of them also didn't know the health effects, which was, I think, as someone who lives in a bubble of fighting the oil industry, it's just like, our bread and butter. We talk about asthma, birth defects, no one has taken the time to explain it to them. So we had to kind of step back and make some postcards that showed the health effects. Because when we asked people, do you have any health effects from living next to oil drilling? They said, oh, no. But when we slow down and we're like, do you have headaches or asthma or have you noticed anything funky in your air or black soot? Everyone was like, oh, yes, totally. And once you kind of take the time to explain what these health effects are, everyone reported issues. I was talking to a resident last night who she had come to our event last week and she didn't know about the health effects and was trying to understand why she had this like terrible cough that just wouldn't go away. And our other volunteer built her a box fan and air purifier, which I thought it was really a beautiful moment where like we were actually able to provide some tangible relief. And she said that it's gotten like 80% better since she got that air purifier. But she was like, no one knows about this. She's like, we should be telling everyone. And I'm like, I agree, we should be telling everyone, which is what we would try to do in Signal Hill. Out of the like 11,000 people, we canvassed over 1,000 doors. We sent out over 1,000 postcards, and we got hundreds of residents to tell the city that they didn't want this permit extension.
As much as the residents of Signal Hill were surprised to hear of this permit extension for the oil drilling in their neighborhood and immediately rallied to fight against it, the city was, in many ways, built for the oil industry.
Most people I talk to, and many people within the city itself, do not realize Signal Hill is its own city. It was founded about 100 years ago, and it became its own city to avoid oil barrel taxes, Long Beach's taxes on the oil industry. So the city was founded to shelter the oil industry from responsibility, from the fiscal responsibility of the mess they're creating. So it's an oil town. They've got statues of oil wells. They've got a big plaque where their first oil well was located. They've got a city song. It's pretty wild. It's about how they like have stolen the land from the indigenous people, and like the black gold, is just exploding from the hill, and like what a beautiful sight. So the city itself, like there's this narrative that Signal Hill Petroleum, the oil industry there, is like a good neighbor that has built this city because the city was built around the oil industry. And it's crazy, the library is actually shaped to look like an oil pump jack. I don't really see it, but I was told that was the intention with the architecture. I'm like, this is crazy. The people don't feel the same way. But there's this narrative that the city is sharing that we need oil, that this is like what the city was founded on, it's what makes us strong, and that the oil industry is our best friend, and that they're taking actually very good care of us because it's California and it's well regulated, and it's not true.
While Signal Hill's city infrastructure celebrates the presence of oil throughout the city through plaques and statues dedicated to it, many oil sites within the city of Los Angeles are purposely camouflaged. Behind the walls of the populated shopping mall, Beverly Center, are numerous active wells. The Tower of Hope, which was just recently demolished, decorated an oil derrick as a piece of public art with the help of school children. And the Thumbs Islands off the coast of Long Beach, designed by original Disneyland landscape architects, were produced to look like offshore vacation sites.
I've always thought it's them knowing what they're doing to our community and them covering their tracks in some sort of way. The well that I grew up next to, at one point I thought it was an amusement park when I was like 4, and I was like, I'm really upset they don't invite me over. And when I realized what it was, I was like, oh, checks out. I understand why I was never invited over, and it's not an amusement park. But because they're hidden behind these tall walls, because sometimes they're beautified with mosaics on the outside, it is always left to our imagination what's behind those walls, what is going on there. When drilling for oil, it often smells like rotten eggs. But the oil well in my community would add even more chemicals to mask the smell. So then it would smell like that artificial guava or cherries. Citrus, chocolate was a big one they used. One, showing how little they care about the community and the workers because even more chemicals and what they already use to extract. But secondly, how little they care about us and our health because they're willing to poison us even more to look more innocent, per se.
And the workers are wearing PPE, masks.
Sometimes, not all the time. The oil well I grew up to, it's huge walls, always closed, except one day out of the years I've lived there, I've only seen the doors open maybe a handful of times. And I was walking home from school one day with my mom, and the doors were open. We just looked at each other, not one word, and we both ran inside. And we were greeted by a very friendly oil well worker who asked us what we were doing. And it's when my mom and I made our acting debut, right? We were like, oh, my daughter has always asked me what's going on inside, knowing that we've been advocating for like years to shut this well down. And the oil well worker gave us an entire tour of the facility. He took us underground and showed us the 21 active wells that they were using and operating with. He wore no protective gear, no helmet, no goggles, no gloves. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt and sneakers. He let me go inside with my little schoolgirl uniform, and he let my mom go inside with open-toed shoes. Like, there was zero protection there, and he started opening these valves. And as soon as he did that, it smelled. I was nauseous. I had a headache. And I asked him if the smell bothers him. And his response was, I can't smell it anymore. The loss of smell is a very common symptom when exposed to hydrogen sulfide for long periods of time. And he also gifted me a souvenir of the oil from the oil well and water in a mason jar, so I could take it and show my friends that no matter how hard you mix oil and water, they will never mix. And I have it in my room still as a reminder ever since. It just goes to show that even the workers, they're not being protected the way that they should be.
Workplace safety issues are unfortunately common in the oil and gas industry, an industry that has been at the center of numerous hazardous events. In 1907, just a few years after the discovery of oil in LA County, an oil well ruptured near Echo Park Lake and caught the body of water on fire. It burned for 3 days. The destructive impacts aren't limited to the past. Just a few years ago, an oil spill near Kenneth Hahn Park sent over 1,600 gallons of oil into neighboring communities. The site just 30 feet from Nalleli's home had particularly ignored regulations that protected workers and community members in the years that it ramped up operations, which coincided with the health issues Nalleli and her family experienced. The site was later found to be violating multiple public health laws at the time.
He taught me that when opening these valves, he had to do that every 5 to 10 minutes to prevent an explosion. I was 10 years old when I learned this, and I learned that essentially we were living on a bomb. And the only way I could comprehend it was that we were popcorn. And if you're ever a few seconds too late to your microwave, your popcorn gets burnt. So then I had this ongoing fear, checking the clock every 10 to 15 minutes and whispering to myself, I hope they open the valves. That was the reality for me. That's the reality of frontline communities. That's the fear and urgency we act with and organize with, is the urgency we invite you all to act with and organize with, because our lives are literally on the line. We live and grow up in what are called sacrifice zones, as if our lives are less to somebody else's, and that's not the case.
Sacrifice zones, as Nalleli mentions, are areas with incredibly high levels of air pollution, environmental hazards, and toxins. These are oftentimes neighborhoods with low income or BIPOC community members, and are a marker of the reality of environmental racism. Notorious examples include Louisiana's Cancer Alley, an area riddled with petrochemical production, and Flint, Michigan, a town where pleas for clean water went ignored for years. Without proper government regulation, the people in these areas are basically being sacrificed, so that extractive industries like oil can continue to make a profit at the expense of human health and well-being.
It can feel like this kind of David and Goliath fight, especially when big oil is often targeting frontline communities and setting up operations in communities that are already disadvantaged in other ways. But I do want to, at the same time, save the space for being able to celebrate the victories and the wins that we have seen as people have been organizing with these campaigns against big oil. What are some of the biggest successes that you've seen?
This is such a hard question because the magnitude of the issue is so big and our wins often just feel so small. And it is really important to celebrate these wins. And it can also sometimes feel silly to be like, we got like 40 wells shut down in Culver City and amid thousands. And LA City and LA County voted to phase out oil drilling, but the courts found it illegal, so we got to do it again. I do really feel like grounded in the wins of our organizing. And I think one win is 2018, I didn't know about oil drilling in LA. I moved out here to work in entertainment. I studied environmental science. I had a lot of climate anxiety. I had internalized it, and I was trying to go zero plastic. I was doing what the oil industry wanted us to do, which is to think that like we were the problems, and it wasn't working, and I was spiraling and so anxious. And eventually I found Sunrise Movement.
Sunrise Movement, as Nicole mentions, is one of the largest groups mobilizing for climate action through policy change and grassroots activations. They have hubs across the US, including in Los Angeles.
I went to Sunrise training where they re-explained the problem as systematic as the oil industry purposely lying to you that they know they can fix the problem. They want you to think it's hopeless. They want you to think it's your fault. Nalleli was there speaking about her experience living next to oil drilling, and that was, I think, the first time I was exposed to this problem. It was just such a tangible solution. Since then, I have been able to organize hundreds of people to take on the work as well. If we want to talk structural wins, I do think the narrative is changing in LA City and LA County. It's gone from, oh, we can't do anything about this, we need oil, to this is a public health emergency and we're dedicated to doing all that we can. A lot of local governments are open to collaborating with the people most impacted, and they're trying, even though it's really hard. And so that feels like a win too.
A victory that always comes to mind is when I found out that the oil well that I grew up across the street from would be temporarily closing. A move that was made permanent years later, but just finding out that they were going to temporarily close, that was huge. Because for 4 years, we had been advocating in what felt like silence before anybody even looked at us or listened to us. So to have that David and Goliath victory was huge. I remember when my mom got the call that they were going to temporarily close. I was 12 years old. I was so happy, ecstatic. I was jumping up and down. I asked for permission to scream inside of the house from how happy I was. And I ran to the window and I opened it. Something that was so simple, but for 4 years we couldn't do in our very own home. Immediately I closed it after 30 seconds because it was mid-November and 60 degrees, which was too cold for me. But it was the fact that now I could do that, and that was a monumental victory for me personally. And I always think of that David and Goliath story, and I know how that story ends. And it's always been an honor to be David alongside my community with this fight.
I think that's really beautiful that the first thing you want to do is go just take in some air, because if nothing else, we all deserve to be able to breathe in our own homes and our neighborhoods. Did they have a formal statement on why they were temporarily closing it?
They temporarily closed after former U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer flew out and had a press conference, and she pled them to cease operations, and they did so on good terms, whatever that means. She had that press conference, and shortly after, 5 officials from the EPA went inside of Alanco to conduct an investigation. Within 5 minutes of being inside, they all had to evacuate because they got sick. That's what it took. 5 minutes inside of that well. And I'm still friends with one of the former EPA officials, and whenever we see each other, he still talks about remembering how sick he felt when he was inside.
Yeah, I mean, that'll do it. I wanted to ask because I've seen some of these operations, they will close because they say something about it's not economically viable, or they just come up with a range of excuses. So to hear that it was directly related from political pressure means that the EPA, despite the current administration, does have a very major role to play in putting pressure on these corporations to shut down their operations that are hurting neighborhoods. And obviously in that case, that really did work. But being able to see that kind of win that's pretty big.
Can I share another win? Because I feel like I was kind of cynical when we started. I just wasn't warmed up.
Absolutely. Please do.
Sometimes celebrating is a practice, and you have to invest in it. No, I think we should talk about the SB 1137, the statewide setback bill.
Nicole is referring to the California Senate Bill 1137, a bill that has been at the center of the fight to protect communities from the impacts of oil drilling in California. Back in 2022, Governor Newsom signed SB 1137 into law, a novel bill that establishes a 3,200-foot buffer zone between oil and gas operations and sensitive locations like homes, schools, and hospitals.
Sierra Club supported a statewide coalition of frontline orgs who were fighting to make it illegal to drill for oil next to people's homes. And we were able to pass this bill that would ban new oil drilling within 3,200 feet of homes, schools, hospitals, other sensitive receptors, and have increased health protections on existing wells and make it harder to renew those permits.
This was a huge win against the fossil fuel industry, and an incredible example of how grassroots efforts can create real change. But big oil wouldn't stand down easily.
We didn't even get to celebrate, and then the oil industry, they did a ballot referendum. This is why sometimes it's hard to celebrate, is the oil industry is so quick. And it basically paused the law until the voters could vote on it. And I will say that Signal Hill Petroleum was the largest donor to the referendum process. So them trying to squeeze in these 46 new wells and this increased timeline as SB 1137 was paused felt very intentional and part of their strategy. We were able to just get enough pressure and change the narrative that the industry realized that they were going to lose on the ballot, and they withdrew their referendum. So now SB 1137, the setback bill, is in effect, and it is illegal to drill new wells next to people's homes in the entire state of California. And that is a huge win. We really have to be vigilant to make sure it's enforced, but the law is actually on our side now.
SB 1137 changes the future of public health in the state of California. It's something that I still get emotional talking about, because I know that by this law being in effect now, we're one step closer to having my story end with me. We're one step closer to ensuring a 9-year-old won't become an activist out of survival, or that a future 19-year-old isn't forced to choose between her life or her reproductive system the way I was. That's historic. Knowing that we are giving children the ability to be children and elders to be elders without fear of having some sort of health scare pop up years down the line. And now it's monumental. And like Nicole said, to have the oil industry withdraw the referendum, the very last minute possible, after spending $61 million, we scared big oil straight. There's no other way to put it. We scared them straight, It's something that is so powerful. And I was talking to Jane Fonda about this, and she said that the many won over the money. And that's exactly right. Because while they had endless budgets and deep pockets, we were advocating with the truth, the power of our community, and the love that we have for our community. That's something that's always unstoppable.
I love that you casually say, I was just talking to Jane Fonda. But I know she's become such a huge ally too in the work that you do. And I'm curious, because I've seen you speak with the Hollywood Climate Summit before, and obviously Jane Fonda has used her platform to have a lot of advocacy over the years of, being this famous celebrity. How do you think that storytelling is playing a role in kind of redefining our relationship with big oil?
I think storytelling is a very, very compelling form of activism that oftentimes goes unnoticed. And that's why I'm such a proud storyteller, because I know how much the power behind sharing our stories. I've always said I don't know all the legal terms or all the scientific terms, but I know my story. And that's what I'm always going to share truthfully and unapologetically. It allows us to be vulnerable with each other and say, oh my gosh, I have a 9-year-old niece or a 9-year-old nephew or a 9-year-old daughter. I can imagine that, or I can picture that, or I can picture these health impacts that we're facing, because so many times when we talk about urban oil extraction or the climate crisis, we use very big numbers, and that's so hard for us to wrap our head around. I can't picture 2 million people living in the state of California next to an oil and gas well. I can't picture the 18 million Americans living a quarter of a mile or less to an active oil and gas well, but I can remember the story of someone.
Hiding beneath the more obvious wins to shut down and phase out active oil sites lies the issue of abandoned wells. The site next to Nalleli's childhood home temporarily ceased operations in 2013, but the work to permanently plug this site only began last year. These wells are left behind by the oil industries once they're no longer profitable or feasible, and they continue to seep toxic chemicals into the air, land, and even groundwater supply. Information on these idle wells isn't always easily accessible, It's hard to locate sites that have been fully abandoned for years and are sometimes completely invisible. The LA Times mapped out active and idle wells in Los Angeles County with the Center for Public Integrity to help people identify if they're one of the 500,000 people living within 1,500 feet of an oil site. On their map, you can see that idle wells are strewn across Los Angeles. Across the Los Angeles City oil field, which peaked production in 1901, there are numerous idle wells hiding under the surface, spanning from Koreatown through Echo Park all the way to Dodger Stadium. These wells have been abandoned since as far back as 1917. In California, there are over 36,000 wells sitting idle. Across the US, there's an estimated 2.2 million unplugged and abandoned wells.
1/3 of the wells are not producing any oil. Another third, and this data is from a couple of years ago, so it might even be more, are marginal, meaning that they are producing fewer than 5 barrels a day. So in the next few years, like 2/3 of all the wells in California are going to be inactive. The majority of the wells are not profitable anymore, or they're out of oil. And this is after they've figured out more and more disgusting ways to get every last drop out, like pumping acid into wells, which they do in LA.
Acidizing. The oil well that I grew up next to, that was their non-conventional form of drilling, was acidizing. Drilling for oil, typically, they'll drill into the ground and extract the oil. But when the easy accessible oil is no longer there because they've taken it all, they use non-conventional form of drilling like acidizing, fracking, slant drilling, gravel packing, all those crazy things. And with acidizing, they will use thousands of pounds of acid and drill into the ground. It's very, very toxic and poisonous, not only to our environment, but to the ground. And they often use clean drinking water as well when doing this. So then our clean drinking water that could be used by families is now being poisoned by the oil industry and now toxic.
When we were working on a state bill, maybe almost over 90% of all wells in California are using these unconventional forms of drilling. So they're all really dangerous. Just the way that we're drilling has become more and more dangerous as the oil industry is getting more desperate.
Yeah, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel now because they've taken every last drop and they're still trying to get even more than the last drop.
Many owners of these sites have no plan to plug the wells that are already idle or about to become idle. Oftentimes, the government and the taxpayers are left on the hook for cleaning them up. It would cost Chevron, the top holder of idle wells in California, just 4.8% of its 2022 profits to plug its idle wells in California.
And they're not cleaning up their mess, which is, when you mentioned, that's the huge thing too, is that they're legally required to clean up the wells. The ones next to people's homes, the ones in Echo Park that are now under luxury apartment complexes, those will take millions of dollars. Those could take millions of dollars to adequately seal. The oil industry is legally required to clean up their mess, and they're not. So that's a huge problem with these idle wells. And as we phase out oil drilling, one thing we've been pushing for is the industry needs to clean up their mess.
Make polluters pay.
Yeah, make polluters pay.
For both of you as people who are organizing in this space, who are seeing the victories and the change, how are you envisioning a cleaner, greener future where we take down big oil, where we start to have healthier communities, and where we basically make polluters pay and win?
I dream of a world where activism is not born out of survival for a child, but something that they choose to become when they're older and they know what activism is. I fight so my story ends with me. I believe everyone has a right to breathe clean air regardless of their age, gender, socioeconomic status, religion, or zip code. It's a clean, basic human right, and it's heartbreaking that in the year 2025 in the United States, we're still advocating for that. But as long as we're here, we have a very important and crucial role to play. My mom always says that this movement is a puzzle, and without you, the puzzle is incomplete. We all have our unique shape to this puzzle, and no one can fit that shape but you. Your unique abilities, whether it's storytelling, fundraising, being behind the camera, donating, I don't know, we all have an integral role to play when it comes to this movement. So find your piece, find your voice, and we're waiting for you.
Your mom is such a badass.
My mom is my best friend. I love her so much.
I do think there are those days where like the air is clear outside in LA and it's the most beautiful city in the world, and everyone's outside and they're walking and taking the train and public transit, and the vision is, every day the air is wonderful because our government has invested in the things that they know they could be investing in. They know we need to invest in, like housing and public transit and healthcare and just like taking care of people. My visioning is, how can we create the communities and the systems that we need to thrive and be safe and not be poisoned? My neighbors and I, we have a little native garden that we share between the sidewalk and the street where we put native plants for the pollinators. And it's like a nice little metaphor for like repairing the earth that we have so damaged. And she needs so much repair, and repairing ourselves and our relationships and how we view each other and what we focus on. That's my long-winded way of saying. My vision is like, we live in a society that values life and the earth and all living things.
I want to live there.
I want to live there too.
Me too.
Frontline organizers in LA County and LA City are paving the way for a future without oil, but legal challenges launched by Big Oil will continue to present hurdles in the pathway to a healthy future. One person can make a difference in this fight, but when we come together as a community with love behind us, that's when we're unstoppable.
Hi, it's Megan from the Sierra Club Angeles chapter, here with your weekly call to action. Are you feeling inspired by the amazing stories you heard this week? Ready to activate and join the fight against fossil fuels? Come organize with us at the Sierra Club to phase out oil drilling in Los Angeles. You can join our Clean Break Committee, which meets monthly to organize on these issues. Find out more at cleanbreak.info. That's cleanbreak.info. We'll see you there.
Thank you for listening to the Climate Dispatch podcast. I'm your host, Taya Jeanette, and getting us hyped to fight climate injustice in our communities is genre-defying LA-based band Mermaid with their song Disassociate.
Makes me wanna scream. If
Climate Dispatch is a production of Stranded Astronaut and the Sierra Club Angeles chapter, produced by myself, Tay Jeanette, Meg Pruce, and Megan Spatz. Audio engineering and editing by Maxfield Biggs, original theme music and score by Phil Hamilton, and graphics by Cirrus Marlo Sama.